Fox News Podcast presents Brett Baer's All-Star Panel.
America's got to be in the lead if you want to deal with these threats. We're going to lead.
The mourning is over. The Shiva is done. And if you're a conservative, you should be optimistic.
You know, my main priority right now is making sure that it delivers for the American people.
We have to make our country great again, and I will do that.
I think the president gets criticized by people all the time for the stuff he says, by people who ignore what he does.
Now, Fox's chief political anchor, Brett Baer.
I do believe he wants to end it. That's what President Trump told reporters after a 2-hour phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday, as he expressed confidence that Russia will come to the table to work on a meaningful peace deal with Ukraine.
I said, when are we going to end this, Vladimir? I've known him for a long time now. I said, when are we going to end this bloodshed, this bloodbath? It's a bloodbath. And I do believe he wants to end it.
The president also took to Truth Social, announcing that Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire. He even floated the idea of hosting the talks at the Vatican as Pope Leo XIV calls for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Russia's president telling reporters that Moscow was ready to work toward a memorandum on a possible future peace agreement, but only if the root cause of the crisis is eliminated. Meanwhile, back in Washington, President Trump making his way to Capitol Hill Tuesday morning, urging House Republicans to unite behind his big, beautiful bill, a sweeping piece of legislation that House Speaker Mike Johnson hopes to send to the president's desk, possibly in the summer. To discuss all of this and more, we bring in our panel, Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram, Fox News contributor Katie Pavlich, and former Biden-Harris campaign surrogate Kevin Walling. Chad, where are we on the bill? And did the president's visit certify or get everybody singing from the same sheet of music?
Not quite. In fact, when you talk to some Republican members coming out of the meeting, they kind of exclaimed that there were more no votes on the bill than there were going in. I mean, there definitely was support there. Steve Scalise, the majority leader, he called President Trump the closer. And President Trump said that there was lots of unity, lots of harmony, lots of love, his term, in the room. Mark Amadei, who's a Republican from Nevada, coming out of the room, said that the president was absolutely on fire, just killed it for the first 30 minutes, said it was, quote, spellbinding. So, yes, there was support there. But this gets into the particulars. Legislation is about individual lines and sentences on pieces of paper. And it's good for everybody to be all, hunky-dory and things. It's another thing for people to say, does that work in my district? Does that work in my state? And that's what Mike Johnson has to figure out now sometime in the next 24, maybe 48 hours. He says that he can do what he calls a cleanup amendment that could conceivably fix the problems with tax cuts, fix problems with Medicaid work requirements, fix problems with SALT, that's the deduction for state and local taxes in high tax states, and get everybody on board. Right now, there are multiple Republican no's. Thomas Massey, a Republican of Kentucky, is a no, and he's been opposed for a while, and President Trump called him out. The president then called out Mike Lawler, a Republican from one of the swingiest districts in the country, from suburban New York City, who's one of the big pushers for SALT, and said, I know your district better than you do. Don't let me hold this up. And Mike Lawler says, well, I'm only one of 3 Republicans in the House that represents a district that Vice President Harris carried last year, so I think I know how to win this district. So there's a lot of infighting right now, but we have to see whether or not in this Rules Committee meeting that's going to come at 1 o'clock in the morning, yes, I said that right, 1 o'clock in the morning, Wednesday, whether or not Mike Johnson drops in this change amendment. He needs to fix the big, beautiful bill, and it's unclear if he can fix the big, beautiful bill with one big, beautiful change.
Yeah, and really, Katie, fitting all this in and getting all the different factions to buy in is part of the issue here. And the president was saying, you need to think in the big picture. The Senate just unanimously voted to pass the No Tax on Tips Act, 100-0. But that all factors into the numbers.
Yeah, we're in the don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good part of negotiations here. And the fact is that all of these parts of this bill were sent to the Budget Committee over the weekend and passed out at Budget Committee. And there's not a ton they can actually do to change the text of the bill. You have all of the House committees that have sent their portions for basically what's been described as stapling. Now you have the rules and amendments that can be offered, but it's been described to me from the Speaker's office that basically if there are things that need to be changed, it's going to have to just be handshakes and reassurances, not necessarily going to be written into the law. So if these lawmakers who have problems with that are willing to accept that kind of commitment rather than having things actually changed to get this vote done by Thursday, which is their goal, is going to be part of the story as well moving forward. But you have two different factions of Republicans. You have the Freedom Caucus side, which doesn't think this bill goes far enough to cut spending. Then, of course, you have the Mike Lawlers of the Republican caucus who are saying, we need some more relief on things like SALT, which a lot of the country doesn't quite understand because it affects really New Jersey, New York, and Illinois. So these are things that are difficult for a speaker to bring together, but they have 2 days to get it by the deadline that they want. And it's interesting that the president was on Capitol Hill on Tuesday, which indicates they still have some ways to go here to get everyone in line.
And Kevin, is there any Democrat who's going to go vote for any of this?
Yeah, certainly not, Brett. They think the Democratic caucus, obviously you have Hakeem Jeffries, the leader in the House, is almost salivating over this issue of Medicaid and the notion of cuts and the fact that the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, has predicted at least 8.6 million Americans now covered under Medicaid will lose their coverage as part of this reconciliation package. So certainly, Democrats are looking to make health care one of the key issues. It's been a successful issue in the past, especially in midterms that we've seen when Donald Trump is not on the ballot and you have more low propensity voters that you need to turn out. So, the interesting nature of these Democrats in these caucus meetings and in these hearings has really been this kind of accusatory, combative stance that they've been taking as part of these negotiations. And I suspect you won't see any Democrats go along with that final bill. Of course, Republicans have that 3-seat majority, 220 members. So every vote is critical under Mike Johnson.
Chad, what about that Medicaid stat that Kevin had about the numbers getting cut?
Well, that's something the Democrats are going to jump on, and this is where the president in the meeting today said, "Don't blank with these programs." I mean, I think that's something that's very important.
Does the current version do that?
Well, that's the thing, is that the Democrats are interpreting these work requirements as cuts. And that's where they're going to take that to the bank and run with that politically. And that's where Republicans say, wait a minute, that's not what we're actually doing. But every time you deal with something that's fiscal like that, and you are always changing the dials and whatnot, somebody is going to interpret that as a cut. And somebody else is going to interpret that as an effort to save the program or make the program more solvent. I had a lengthy conversation today with Jody Arrington, who is the chairman of the Budget Committee, and he said that's what this is all about. He said if we don't address some of these things now, we're not interpreting that as a cut. That's an issue to salvage that. Again, that's going to be in the eye of the beholder. But you know what the Democrats are going to do with that when they target these moderate Republicans in all those seats. I mentioned Mike Lawler a few minutes ago. They're looking at Don Bacon, a Republican from Nebraska. They're going to this is going to be, without question, probably the most consequential vote, either this vote or if it has to come back from the Senate, that vote, the final version that will be documented. And in every ad that you start to see in September and October of next year, you'll see that little thing at the bottom of the screen, and it will be pointed to these two roll call votes, how Michelle Fischbach voted, how Marionette Miller Meeks voted, how Lawler voted, all these different members from these districts that they think they can win on the Democratic side.
Right. But Katie, the question is, can you defend taking people off of Medicaid who are not supposed to be on it? Illegal immigrants, people who are not supposed to be in the program based on where they are on, in their pricing and in how they factor into Medicare or Medicaid.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats are being pretty dishonest when they call these changes to Medicaid rather cuts. I mean, when you're taking 1.4 million illegal immigrants out of the Medicaid system, that is not a cut. That is taking people who are not eligible for the program, the taxpayer-funded healthcare program, in the first place. And so if Republicans can get the messaging right, especially on the issue of legal immigration, which this White House and Republicans have high marks on, even months later, I think they can probably win that battle and make the case that, asking people to have work requirements, able-bodied adults, in order to receive taxpayer-funded healthcare is something that 80% of the country or more agrees with. So if they can get those 2 points out, which is what they're actually doing in this legislation, then I think people can really wrap their minds around the fact that these are not cuts, so to speak. They are simply making the program more efficient for people who actually qualify. And when you take 1.4 million illegal immigrants out of a program, it sure opens up a lot of room for others who are eligible to come into it and take advantage of those benefits.
Panel, we'll hold it right there.
Kevin, one of the things Democrats usually do well is stick to the same sheet of music, and they often, get everybody together and have the talking points. They're doing it now on, these what they call cuts, and where they're attacking this big, beautiful bill, in the president's words. But they also did it in defense of President Biden and any challenges to his mental competency. Understanding that he has this diagnosis of prostate cancer and that well wishes are coming from both sides of the aisle, that he beats that and does so quickly. There is still a lot about this whole thing on mental competency and who knew what when, and why people didn't say something different than what they were saying.
Yeah, Brett, and you're seeing this play out in real time. It's almost becoming now a litmus test, especially for former members of the president's cabinet, Pete Buttigieg. Others have been asked about it. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has also been asked about it in recent days. And there's this desire to just say, okay, that's in the past. We need to move forward. And I don't think that is really going to be a winning strategy with the American people who, were, fully supportive of, Joe Biden not seeking a second term based on the age question early on in the first year of the former president's administration. And optically, that was challenging for the American people to witness. And it was Democrats that, elected Democrats and appointed Democrats that took far too long to, be in agreement with the American people. So there is a reckoning that is going on right now within my party over this particular issue. I don't think it's going to go away. Sadly, with, the former president's announcement with his diagnosis, you're even seeing questions about when he found out about this and when the family found out about this. So I think, the former president, as he's dealing with this diagnosis and figuring out treatment, needs to do much more in terms of talking about, when he was diagnosed with this and the process going forward. But certainly these questions are not going to go by the wayside in the coming days and weeks as more of these books come out. Obviously, the Jake Tapper, Alex Thompson book is out today, Tuesday, when we're having this conversation. And that's fueling a lot of, the conversations in this drip that we've seen about, conversations that people have had with the former president.
Yeah, Chad, do you think that once Congress gets over this hurdle of this bill, that they may look back and call and have hearings on this very issue? I mean, our White House team is now saying that they officially can confirm that the last prostate test that they have on record is 2014 for Joe Biden, which is quite something.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a hearing looking into some of these things around the periphery of this next week and kind of just, looking at President Biden. But absolutely. I mean, I think that the Oversight Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, they would certainly look into this. And the other thing is that the Democratic leaders have not been very forthcoming. Every single time Hakeem Jeffries has been asked about this, he has pivoted, say we want to look forward. They're just trying to get through this debate right now about the big, beautiful bill and hope that this kind of goes under the table. But all you need to do is go back and look at some of the reporting last year. I remember there was a conference call last summer shortly after that debate, and there was a question about whether President Biden should be in, and Don Beyer, who's a Democratic representative from Northern Virginia, really spoke up and expressed some very frank concerns, caught him in the hall that Monday morning. He just absolutely did not want to talk. There were these meetings over at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee across the street from the Capitol, and most of the Democrats, when they came to meet with the president's then, campaign team, they did not walk over, and we're talking about walking across the Capitol lawn here, Brett. They drove because they knew that myself and a bunch of other reporters were standing in between, and they did not want to answer our questions about this because they were very concerned privately, but were afraid to express that publicly. And for somebody to say, we think it's time for President Biden to go, whether or not they knew that definitively based on their own interactions, which most of them, at least publicly, say, no, we thought he was with it all the time. But there was enough concern privately. And that was what was so remarkable about what Don Beyer said last summer. And then, he was, kind of circumspect about trying to, when I really pressed him about that just shortly after the debate. One thing that always stuck with me about this in the reporting last year was there was a very senior House Democratic source who said to me the morning after the debate, and I said this on your show, they said those around the president have not served him well. And that might be on a myriad of fronts.
Yeah. And Katie, listen, we all know that somebody knew something. Inside that White House, they had to see everything day to day. Vice President Harris met with him once a week for lunch. All of these officials were with him. The people who prepped him at Camp David prior to that debate had to know that there was a chance that there was going to be this car wreck, which we ended up seeing real time June 27th.
Of course. You could see it from the outside, not to mention people who were working for him, briefing him. And the bottom line is this. The American people deserve an answer about who was really running the country, who was making these big decisions, who was in the room for these big pronouncements. The president now, President Trump, sent out a Truth Social on Tuesday saying that he thinks this was a treason at the highest level because there are people around the president who knew he was cognitively impaired, and yet there was all these big decisions being made on whether it was border policy or executive orders. So I do think Congress will investigate this. They have an obligation to, and you're having a number of Democrats, including Dan Jones, saying that this was a betrayal of the Republic. But then you also have congressional leadership, as Chad mentioned, Hakeem Jeffries, who really wants to just try and not talk about this and move forward. But this is going to get worse, and we are going to be watching it because clearly we don't have any of the answers, even about when President Biden supposedly left the campaign on his own volition and put out that letter on Twitter without any explanation, and then didn't show up to announce it himself until 24 hours later. So there's so many questions about who was actually making these big decisions, who knew what, when, and who was responsible for this massive cover-up, which is only going to get worse as we get more information.
Brett, can I make one quick point here about something as well? And something I'm always struck about when you talk about presidential health. You had President Woodrow Wilson, who had a stroke, and there was basically the supposition that his wife was running the country, that nobody talked about this, et cetera. So we've been down this road before with presidents. There are yes, exactly. And there's a picture in the Capitol of FDR giving State of the Union with all the radio microphones in front of him in the 1930s, NBC, Mutual, CBS, etc., and the House chamber is packed. And you know that everybody in that room, all the radio reporters, there's no television, knew what was going on. Yet that did not wind up in their reports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty amazing. And it's also amazing to see the context now as some reporters and authors try to recast their knowledge. And as they're going back and talking about this, they're realizing that their coverage may have helped in that cover-up aspect as well. Panel, thanks so much. Now for a bit of history. On May 21st, 1927, Charles Lindbergh completes the first solo nonstop transatlantic flight after Frenchman Raymond Ortegue offered $25,000 to the first aviator who could fly nonstop between Paris and New York. Several of the world's top aviators set out to accomplish this task, including Lindbergh. Following months of preparation, his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, took flight from New York on May 20th, 1927. More than 30 hours later, Lindbergh successfully landed at the Aerodrome in Paris. 5 years later, to the day, Amelia Earhart would become the first woman to make that solo, nonstop transatlantic flight. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave us a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Katie, Kevin, and Chad, I'm Brett Baer. We'll see you next time
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.